Well, good afternoon, drivers, and welcome to Inside Trucking with James Lamb, Episode 4, A Wave of Winning. Today is Sunday, September 21st, and I'm coming to you to kind of give you a recap of September 2025 and to tell you the amazing accomplishments that have been unfolding as the month goes on. There's still a whole nother week to go, so I reserve the right to come back at you, next week and fill in the blanks. So let me tell you what's been going on in September and how many victories SBTC has scored, how many goals we've accomplished, and they just keep coming one after another. So number one, broker transparency, right? So episode 2, you may recall, was all about broker transparency and our call for FMCSA and USDOT to kind of reevaluate the direction that it appeared that they were going to be going. As of early September, the spring 2025 unified agenda came out, right? That's the government's plan for, what it's going to be doing rulemaking-wise. Supposed to come out twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. And the spring unified agenda was overdue and finally came out in September. And it revealed some, what we thought at the time were kind of disturbing trends, I guess you would say. It looked like they were going to stop the current property broker transparency rulemaking that they finally did in response to SBTC's May 4th, 2020 petition, right, in November of 2024. That's when they started that rulemaking, and it looked like they were going to put the halts on that, and maybe they still are. I'm not sure, but it looks like they were going to do a second notice of proposed rulemaking in May of 2026. And we got all nervous because that we've been talking for a while now about how the SBA Office of Advocacy, and by the way, SBA, right, stands for Small Business Administration, right? SBA somehow teamed up with the TIA, Transportation Intermediaries Association. You know those guys. I've been talking about them for 15 years or so, and those are the guys that, for the most part, represent the big business 3PL multi-billion-dollar brokers, right? So we couldn't figure out what is the SBA doing talking to the TIA, which is big business interests. So, SBA did a letter that appeared to be like they were now based in Switzerland because they were being neutral between what they said was the small truckers, small carriers on the one hand, and small brokers on the other. And they weren't talking to small brokers. They were talking to TIA. And TIA was saying that, I guess, they represented small brokers. TIA takes $14,400 a year from big members like TQL and $600 from the few that are small businesses. So I don't, that's the last I heard. I'm sure it's more than that. That's probably 10 years ago. So, we didn't know what was going on with this unified agenda notice. And then last week, Secretary Duffy was out in the field and he was meeting with and talking with truckers. And one trucker, and this is on video, you can go to Secretary Duffy's, I think it's @SecDuffy, Twitter handle. You can go to his posts and you can see there's a video, and the trucker is thanking him for all his great new policies that he's implementing. And the trucker says, but the one big thing is transparency, broker transparency, and we really need you to address that, Secretary Duffy. And so later Secretary Duffy posts that video, and then he comments and he says that we're going in the direction of broker transparency. So, whatever they're doing, whatever, is coming out in May of 26, even though we don't like the kicking the can down the road, we're hoping that rather than it being diluted, which seems to be the recommendation of the SBA and the TIA, right? Maybe they're going stronger than they proposed in November of 2024. I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. But the one thing that I know is that Secretary, Duffy has made a point-blank promise to truckers and the industry that we are going to require brokers be upfront with truckers, independent truckers, and motor carriers. So that's a really good sign, and we're looking forward to that coming to fruition. We're looking forward to seeing what that really entails. But it looks like, although we thought we got side railed, it looks like we're still on the track, right, to broker transparency, brought to you by the SBTC as of our petition of May of 2020. We were the first ones to do that. OIDA followed us, and then a whole bunch of people have gotten on board and fought with us side by side for this. So, this is not only an SBTC win. This is a NOAA win. This is a win for a lot of folks that have been working hard on this. So I thank you all, for sticking it out with us. So that's number one. So Duffy's pledge to continue to move toward strengthening broker transparency. Number two, win number two has to do with the Office of the Inspector General at DOT, and their announcement last week that they are finally moving forward with what appears to be a re-audit of their 2002 audit for CDL standards. It looks like it's at least in furtherance of that original audit. Here we are 23 years later, right? And this is about the English language proficiency issue. Now, let me give you a little short recap. SBTC got involved in this issue 3 years ago, in early 2022. And what we did was we went to FMCSA under Secretary Pete at the time, and we said, listen, we'd like you to preempt the state's ability to go and give the CDL knowledge exam, the written exam, in languages other than English, and at least do some kind of English language proficiency testing, even if it's a supplement. And we said, and that's that's pursuant to the recommendations of the Inspector General from 2022, or I should say 2002. And at the time, we were saying maybe you can just take over, because this is interstate commerce. This is a federal CDL program that that FMCSA controls. So we tried that. Answer from the FMCSA under the Biden administration: nope, not going to do that. So we went back to the drawing board and we did something else. We then petitioned for a rulemaking, and we said, why don't you make the rule that essentially the Inspector General told you to make back in 2002, at the time 20 years prior, and actually make the states test for English proficiency, put the onus on the states. That's what the IG said. And so FMCSA came back to us, and guess what? They said, nope, not going to do that either. And so we said, okay. So then we filed an exemption application, right? Now, these petitions to FMCSA for rulemaking, petitions, you make a petition and then they respond to you, and the public doesn't necessarily get to see, this interaction, this, interchange. And so we said, well, there is a way for us to make sure the public sees this issue and what we're trying to do. And that's by filing an exemption application. And we have filed exemption applications in the past. They've all been denied by FMCSA. But what it does is it gets it on the public radar, because the FMCSA, when they receive this, they're required to publish the application for the exemption in the Federal Register. And so we knew that, having done this many times before, and so we said, let's do that in this case. And so we asked for an exemption, and the exemption was kind of like it was really a tongue-in-cheek exemption, because we were asking for an exemption from the rule that says that small carriers are supposed to test drivers for English proficiency. And if you think about it, that goes against what we stand for, right? It goes against the whole idea of strengthening English proficiency and enforcement and all that. But we found a little hook, and what we did was we said, listen, in this application for the exemption, we said, look, we're not going to really ask you to get rid of the rule. We're not going to ask for an exemption from the English language proficiency rule, and I mean 49 CFR 391.11b2. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, because of the Inspector General's recommendations way back in 2002 that said you should put the onus, FMCSA, on the states to test for English proficiency, in furtherance of those recommendations, we are going to ask you to exempt carriers, small business carriers, and we had a threshold, in accordance with the SBA, threshold for what a small business is for, this type of category of trucking. And we said, look, the drivers still should have to proclaim that they are in compliance, that they qualify, that they meet, the qualifications, like being over 21 and being able to speak, read, and understand English, because, the highway signs are all in English in America. And so, so we said, so that shouldn't change. And then we said, what we're going for is putting the onus on the carrier instead of the state to proclaim that the driver's assertion that they speak English is true and has been verified, validated, right? And so we're basically saying, whose job is it to really make sure the driver's right in telling the truth that they speak English? Should it be the carrier that is going to employ them, or should it be the state? And we said, look, it should be the state, because the state is issuing the CDL. And when the small business motor carrier, let's say he owns a fleet of 5 trucks and he drives one of them himself, right? And he's hiring a driver for one of his other 4 trucks. Why should he have to go crazy trying to figure out if the guy speaks English, when the CDL itself should be the answer to that question? The state has tested him for English proficiency. So it was a tongue-in-cheek kind of a thing, right? And so we put that application out there, and then they had to publish it in the Federal Register, and now everybody sees what we're doing, right? And of course they come back and they say no, and we expected that they would say no for the 3rd time, right? Because they said no, the other 2 times. On the preemption request and the rulemaking request. But we got it out there, okay? And then we went to the Inspector General as strike number 4 that year, still 2022. And we asked the Inspector General, isn't it time now, after all this that we've done this year, and we keep getting no, 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 isn't it time for you to finally, do a re-audit from your 20-year-old 2002 CDL standards audit and push them to, meaning FMCSA, to do what you told them to do 20 years ago? And so OIG, comes back and they say no, right? And so we're like, what the heck's going on here? Nobody wants to enforce the law, right? So then I write a big article about this on LinkedIn, and I point to how it's funny using the old Prego Italian red sauce commercial. It's in there, right? So you'll find that on LinkedIn, and but we were serious about they were told to do this, FMCSA, by the IG, essentially through a recommendation, and they didn't do it. And then during that 20-year period, they did some things, and then they claimed they did everything that the Inspector General told them. Thus, it's in there, right? No, it wasn't in there. And so we pointed that out, and we said that was a lie. When we titled it, "You Cheated, You Lied, You Said That It's in There." You remember that old song from, I don't know, 1960s, whatever that was. So another little pun there. But basically, we went to Inspector General and we said this, and they said no. So we published all of the 4 things we did in that particular LinkedIn article, right? Now, fast forward, and 3 years goes by, and now in January of 2025, after President Trump is back and Secretary Duffy, is now in as of late January, early February, we go back at them again. We go back at the Inspector General again. We go back at this, at USDOT through the new Secretary again, and we plant these seeds, that this needs to happen. And of course, in the meantime, we pursue Connor's Law, right? And as we're trying to get a sponsor for Connor's Law, President Trump comes back and says, as of April, we're going to make it an executive order that if law enforcement stops a truck and the truck driver can't understand English proficiently, in that case, then he's got to be put out of service. So all of this comes from all these seeds that we planted back in 2022, right? So now, last week, finally, out of nowhere, after we've been, plugging along all year, the Inspector General announces they're going to audit FMCSA for knowledge and skills testing with respect to CDLs. Wow, right? Bam, finally they did it, right? So that is win number 2. Now, win number 3 has to do with Connor's Law, right? So Connor's Law is a law that I proposed and drafted, and it was picked up by Dave Taylor, representative out of Ohio, Republican, and there's like 16, 17 co-sponsors now as of September of 2025. And basically, the iteration that Representative Taylor picked up, they picked up one of the 2 recommendations that we had proposed, and it has to do with putting drivers out of service. So it basically codifies what President Trump's current executive order says. However, we proposed it before that executive order came out. So come on. I mean, it's all developing from our push from, with respect to our March activity on suggesting there should be a Connor's Law. And the other part looks like it's being picked up by some people in the Senate. And there's like 3 or 4, maybe even 5 now, bills that are popping up, all related to this. But our second part was having to do with forcing the states to test for English proficiency, like the Inspector General said back in 2002, right? So everybody seems to be getting on board on at least the right side of the aisle of those sponsors, 16 or 17 sponsors of Connor's Law. None of them are Democrats. And that's disappointing, because this is about highway safety. This is about the safety for your fellow, your fellow drivers, your fellow truckers, all of us on the highway, with our families, school buses filled with kids. And you would think that the people on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, would be in favor of doing something in furtherance of public safety. But nope, they're not signing on. So all we can do is keep plugging ahead and be grateful that Congress is controlled by the Republicans, who seem to be embracing our proposals to make the roads safe again. So that is victory number 3, right? And related to that is the, or I should say, part of that is that Connor's Law is now being talked about not only by trucking media, not only in Congress, not only amongst us in the industry, on social media and the like, but now by mainstream media. And in fact, episode 1 of Inside Trucking was all about my appearance on Newsmax with Rob Astorino on Saturday Agenda a few weeks back, and how we need Connor's Law. And now victory number 3 is Connor's Law is being spotlighted by Fox News as of last week. big victory. So that's victory number 3. Victory number 4 is actually related to that, and that is the White House press secretary tweeting about that article and saying it's important to the White House, it's important to the President of the United States, and it's important to the entire administration. So that's victory number 4. Victory number 5 has to do with the pilot project that Secretary Duffy has announced in reference to hours of service. We have been arguing for years that they should eliminate the 14-hour rule, right? You can't drive after having been on duty for more than 14 hours is the current hours of service regulation. And we found that over the years, very obstructing to a driver's productivity because, there's already, you can't, if you're at least on the trucking side, right, you cannot operate the truck, you cannot drive the truck for more than 11 hours, followed by 10 hours of off duty. And so, they're doing all sorts of things now with this pilot project, sleeper berth, splits and stuff. But we always found that if you got tied up at a receiver and or a shipper, and they ate up so many hours waiting to get loaded or get unloaded, and then you go to drive and you've been on duty for more than 14 hours, and you don't get to drive the full 11 hours that you're supposed to be able to drive. So that seems to be a contradiction in rationale, and so we've asked them to get rid of that, and it looks like that might be part of this pilot. So victory number 5, right? And then the last one has to do with this July petition that we put in with Secretary Duffy, and it has to do with illegal immigration, right? So now, in addition to the issue of English language proficiency, when we look at that incident that happened with Mr. Singh and White Hawk carriers, within the last 30 days, and the U-turn trucker, you remember him, who killed 3 people, on the Florida Turnpike. There were 2 problems there. Allegedly, he did not speak English. And the second is he's an illegal immigrant, and he does not qualify for a driver license, not only because he doesn't, proficiently speak English, but because you're not allowed to have a CDL if you're an illegal immigrant. And his story, as we understand it, is he came in illegally in 2018, proclaiming he's from India, and proclaiming that he can't go back, because something bad will happen to him if he goes back to India. So he asked for, amnesty, and he asked for the ability to remain in the country, as a matter of I forget that other word, amnesty. I always confuse the two, but he's basically asylum. Yeah, he's asked for political asylum, and so while you're waiting, you're still not eligible for a CDL, and Washington State gave him one, and then California gave him a non-domicile, and then New Mexico stopped him after the enforcement date with CVSA for out of service for ELP, which was June 25th of 2025. In July, they stopped him, and apparently there was issues about whether or not he could speak English, and depending on who you listen to and that videotape they released, if you can hear it, FMCSA gave him a test post-accident, and they say he cannot speak English, and I believe them, quite frankly. And throughout this process that he's been in trouble, he's asked for an interpreter to deal with the court system because he's being charged for, I guess, vehicular homicide, 3 counts. So he doesn't think he speaks English well enough to navigate through the court system, even being represented, with an attorney in case he gets questioned by the judge. So sounds like he doesn't speak English to me, by self-admission. So anyway, because of that issue, now the issue of giving CDLs to illegal immigrants comes up, and now Secretary Duffy about 3 weeks ago got tough on those two states, including Indiana for not putting them out of service, but more importantly, Washington and California for giving him a CDL when he is not allowed to have one. Even if he has a work visa, still doesn't qualify for a CDL under the law. And so the issue then became not only, and by the way, those states are under non-conformity warnings that they're about to lose state funding. This follows us asking for Secretary Duffy to do just that, right, back in May, decertification petition and defunding, right? So now they're facing defunding. All these things that SBTC comes up with and asks them to do, they are now doing. It's like at least 90% of the things we've asked for is coming to fruition. It's unbelievable that they're taking their guidance from SBTC and they're looking at our proposed policies and they're adopting them as their own. So we're very proud at what's happening here. But this last success for the week is the president's announcement on Friday of now fees for skilled workers that come in through foreign nationals that come into the country under H-1B visas. This now follows our July. There's an article about this in FreightWaves from July, and it follows our petition to Secretary Duffy to repeal 49 CFR 385.601, 603, blah blah blah. Go look that up. That's a rule that allows FMCSA to give operating authority to foreign nationals that are in foreign countries, who then have to hire workers here. And there's this thing called the E2 treaty, right? And it allows for this kind of stuff as long as E2 treaty investors are making a significant contribution to the country with a big investment. And so what we're worried about is people sneaking into the country after they've gotten a one-man operating authority, right? As a resident and citizen of another country, and then getting into the country, and then operating their foreign-based, non-North American domiciled motor carrier business. Which also will bring up English language proficiency issues as well in many cases. But there's something wrong with this whole system, right? It infringes upon American entrepreneurs. And so now President Trump is saying, you want to come over here on that kind of a work visa under H-1B, right? There's the issue of whether people are still saying truckers are unskilled versus being skilled, but you want an H-1B visa for making an argument that you're a skilled worker. Now you're going to have to pay a $100,000 fee. And that's obviously along the lines of like a treaty, or I should say a tariff. To kind of persuade or dissuade, I guess you should say, this kind of, infringement upon American capitalism and entrepreneurship. So very proud that is now happening, because that goes with our July petition to repeal 385.601, 603, and the like. So 6 wins. Last week alone, 4 of them came down on Friday. What a mind-blowing day that was, that we're seeing all these wins. So SBTC is winning. Just to go back to the issue of Secretary Duffy's pledge, that's huge. That he's still saying we're doing transparency. We're gonna hold brokers accountable and make sure they're up front. That's his word, up front. We're not sure, what TIA's reaction is going to be, what the TIA board's reaction is going to be. We're joking around on Twitter and Facebook with a poll that says, should the TIA staff people be starting to revise their resume? Because not looking too good for Mr. Burrows and all those people, because they're not winning. We are winning. All those guys and their Freight X nonsense, right, which we've called a cartel in previous episodes, not winning. Even the Pink Cheetah dismissal, which looks like a win for TQL and Freight X, the judge was very reluctant about having to do that, and even started to say, I really wish you had told me that a rule is in order, because then I could have found in your favor. And she expressed, this is Judge Sparkle, right? She expressed some concerns about brokers like TQL trying to deregulate themselves through contractual waivers. She does not like that at all, and we can't wait to see what Pink Cheetah does through her appeal that she's announced that she's going to do. So, not looking good for TIA and the big brokers. There's a lot of bad news for them, and so we're very happy that Secretary Duffy has assured us that through his pledge that we're still on the right track, with that. This all on top of the other wins that we've had, so far this year. We defeated speed limiters. We told Secretary Pete in December, and then again in January, early January, before Trump was back, we said, look, we're going to sue you if you try to do this speed limiter nonsense. First of all, it's unsafe, right? You can't speed up momentarily to avoid an accident, and it blocks traffic if two trucks are next to each other on a two-lane highway, right? Both going 65 miles an hour, impedes the flow of traffic. But it was illegal, because the Congress had basically returned the authority to regulate speed to the states under the law. So we said, look, don't make us do this. Just revoke your intended rulemaking. And when Secretary Duffy got on board, guess what happened? They did. They revoked it. So this, and then Marco Rubio getting tough on immigrants that are trying to come here, illegally, and then ultimately drive trucks. There's all sorts of things that are happening. AG Bondi, we said enforce the Hobbs Act when the LA riots were going on, because the last time we asked, way back to Secretary Elaine Chao, they wouldn't do it. And we even sued her over that. And now AG Bondi says, yep, we're going to enforce the Hobbs Act, interference with interstate commerce through violence or threats of violence. That's a riot. That's taking over the highways. That's pulling a guy out of a truck that's driving a hazmat truck because you're taking over the highways and beating him up and taking his wallet, right? That's robbery under the Hobbs Act. So all this kind of stuff we've been asking the government to do, not only over the last, month, not only all year long, not only over the last 5 years, but, for decades. And finally, this stuff is coming to fruition. So really great news coming out of Washington, D.C., this week. I'm so glad and proud to share it with you. I thank all of our coalition partners, that signed on for Connor's Law and that have been working so hard. Some of our new friends, like Chris and Michael from Pastime for a Change. They put out a great video about SBTC and our efforts endorsing us. So we thank them for that. And we thank all of you who are, doing what we're asking you to do. Calls to action. Email the secretary on this stuff, which we called for last week, and sign petitions. It all works, folks. It's all working now. Usually it doesn't, but now it does. Now your voice matters. And we really would respectfully request that you look at these 6 wins from last week alone, and you ask yourselves, is it time now for me to join the SBTC? And we think it is. We're also truckers.com. on the internet. So you can visit truckers.com or smalltransportation.org. Pay your dues. Join the SBTC. Whether you're joining as a individual trucker, $75, or as a small business member, $550, it's well worth it because you see how hard we're working and you see the results that we're now getting. It's unbelievable for an organization, that's only a little over a decade old. We're not your grandfather's trade group of OIDA over 50 years old. We're really giving them and our competition a run for their money, and we're really doing a job on TIA and the big brokers. And Chris, if you need a job, don't call me. All right, folks, I'm James Lamb. This is Inside Trucking, episode 4. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Sunday afternoon and watching. And I'll see you next time. In the meantime, keep on trucking and let's make the roads safe again. Take care.